More NBA draft content here at Locked On Rockets, breaking down Patrick Baldwin Jr., Jalen Duren, and AJ Griffin. Some really exciting NBA prospects. The struggles of Patrick Baldwin Jr. so far to this point. Jalen Duren, and does his lack of versatility hurt his chances at the NBA level, or can he still be dominant? And AJ Griffin looking electric in every bit the possible guy to sneak into the top 5 of this year's NBA draft, coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian, and also host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, where we sincerely thank you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. Joining us now for more draft coverage, as he has done so many times this season, is Nathan Fogg. You can follow on Twitter at Nathan Fogg1, the founder, sole proprietor, if you will, of Tea and Rockets. Tea and Prospects have, if you will, covering the Rockets from across the pond. Nathan, how's it going, man?
Very good, thanks. I've been watching about 8 hours of AJ Griffin today, so I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I haven't watched quite that much AJ Griffin, but I've watched a little AJ Griffin, and I'm pretty excited about him as a prospect. So also we've got 2 other names we're talking about today with Patrick Baldwin Jr. and Jalen Duren, who I guess at this point, like, it's just a running theme that like every 2 or 3 of these draft prospect episodes, somehow we bring up Jalen Duren, because I feel like he was one of the first guys we talked about. Then we talked about him very briefly for an episode, and now he's back again. So I feel like he's just like the guy that's just going to keep finding his way, weaseling back into these little prospect shows at this point.
Yeah. Do you like him specifically, or is this unintentional on your part?
I think it's unintentional at this point, but I do kind of like Jalen Duren. It's just, I feel like in a league that's dominated by players who need to be so versatile and so skilled, Jalen Duren is really good at what he's good at, but he's so limited by the fact that he's just not a skilled big. And you look at the other top bigs of the draft and you're like, okay, what are we doing here, Jalen? So I don't know. It's tough. I still think he's going to have a solid career as an NBA player, but we can get into that in a moment. I want to talk about Jalen Duren a little bit later on. Let's focus here on Patrick Baldwin Jr. right out of the gate, because he's a guy who had some buzz around him, but he hasn't really lived up to some of the hype to this point. So what's your read on PBJ so far?
Yeah, so that's kind of putting it nicely. So Patrick was kind of top 10 going into the draft, going into the college season. Very much had this great shooting high school sort of run, I think it was, and was thought of as probably the best shooting prospect going into the draft. And when you're 6'10", that obviously kind of excites people. It's gone really badly for Patrick Baldwin Jr. so far. So he had offers from like Duke and Kentucky, I think, some major programs. Decided to stay with his dad, who coaches for the Milwaukee Panthers not in one of the big conferences. Just to give you his numbers, his top line numbers for the year. So we're talking 12.1 points, 5.8 rebounds, 1.5 assists, and then the shooting numbers: 34.4% from the field, 26.6% from deep, and 74% from the line. He's been injured, so he's only played, I think, 8 or 9 games now. Since his return, he's played 3 games. He's shooting 26.5% from the field, 11.8% from deep. So it's just not panned out the way people are expecting. And as I saw someone tweet, I'll try and retweet this, put it at my top of my Twitter, so when this episode comes out, you'll see it. But apparently he didn't really shoot that well on the AAU circuit either. So when you kind of combine his like 100 shots at high school where he shot 40%, but now you've got the sample size of college and the sample size of AAU, it's kind of the argument I saw was, well, this is actually who he is, where he's not this elite shooter. The sample size of him being bad is bigger than the sample size of him being good. That makes him not a first round prospect in my eyes, based just on that argument, because that's that's his skill. That's what he does. He plays off ball. He stands in the slot. 66% of his 3-point shots are assisted. He's shown some flashes of creation, but he's at the end of the day, you're hoping he's a 6'10" shooter and who spaces the floor, and that's not what he's been this year at all.
Currently he's not shooting, right? So it's like he's just not delivering on that promise whatsoever. I do wonder if when I watch him play, right, there's nothing. He looks like he has a good shooting form. Like I think that there's nothing there that suggests that there's anything like mechanically wrong with the shot. In fact, some of the clips where you see him like, shooting off motion or things like that, they look good. So I wonder if there's maybe some kind of like a mental component there or what, or if this really is just true to who he is as a player. But at this point, I mean, do you really predict that he's going to fall completely out of the first round? Or do you think there's going to be some team that still banks on like the potential upside of him figuring it out at the next level and kind of taking a flyer on him, be it, a mid first rounder or like a late first round draft pick?
Well, I think he still seems like someone who a team could bring in for the workout. And, you hear it, someone will leak like, oh, he hit like 85 3-pointers out of 100. He might just kill it in the open gym, and someone says, look, college is a small sample size. I tweeted, so before his return, where it's only 3 games and he's coming off an injury and doesn't really look right, but I tweeted an image where he'd made a shot and his foot was on the line, and it was inches, and if he'd just been a foot an inch away, so it was a 3-point shot and that's a make, his 3-point percentage went from like 30.5% to 33%, which is still bad, but a bit more respectable. So it's kind of, you make 2 more and you're starting to look respectable. Obviously, that was before these 3 games return, where it's just, that's inexplicable. I almost don't even count that because it's just so bad, coming off this injury where he's probably rushed back to help his dad. It's small sample size, so if he looks good in workouts, and like you said, the form does look fine, I think it's pretty rushed, and I think I would like to see him attack off the catch more and off the dribble, because I think he does have some good handles and has a really good sort of jab step fake, go quick like Duke can go right. But he probably knows he's a shooter, and he probably, and that's what he's being drafted for. And he probably knows I need to get my percentages up to get back in top 10. So there's a lot of pressure on him to do that. And it's not really, this is just an awful situation. I just feel so bad that this is how it's happened. If you put him in Duke right now and he's playing off Paolo Banchero and AJ Griffin, or if he's playing off Ty Washington with his penetration middle, it looks so much different probably, but that's the situation he chose, and that's going to make it tough for him, for NBA evaluators. I mean, just to give you, so as I was telling you on Twitter today, a very kind guy hooked me up with Synergy today. So let me roll off these stats while I've got it. Isolation, 3rd percentile, post up 17th percentile, pick and roll ball handle 54th percentile, spot up 43rd percentile, off screen 2nd percentile, cutting 24th percentile. Just nothing good at all. There, nothing whatsoever. I don't know what you do with it, honestly.
It's kind of crazy to me. Is this maybe a situation where if he goes into, declares for the draft and goes through workouts and stuff and doesn't get like a promise of, a team that's like, oh yeah, we'll take you, mid first, late first, whatever, a team that's really kind of intrigued by the possibility of him. I wonder if it wouldn't necessarily be worth it for him to just say, you know what, screw it, just do college for another year. Like maybe that's a crazy far-fetched idea, but the thought that he might be able to, actually, if this isn't who he truly is, to kind of go back for another year and reassert himself as the shooter that he can be, and then, potentially coming to the following draft and be a top 5, top 10 pick. I don't know if that'd be worth it, but the numbers right now are not looking great for him.
No, I mean, I don't know what the rules would be because he'd have to transfer to a better program, or else what's the point?
That's fair.
Then it gets a bit dicey there. I think he's still going to be a first-round pick for sure, and I could still see him going top 20. I've seen 1 or 2 mock boards start to drop in towards the bottom of the first, but a lot of places still have him like 10 to 14 just because they buy high score. So this for me, just to give sort of disclaimer, I'm only in college, so I haven't watched any of his high school tape. So he might look amazing in that, and I'm sure he did. That's why he was tipped to be a top 10 prospect. So I think a lot of evaluators would just go for high school tape and say, look, I mean, there's some stuff he does good. Like his passing, I really like it. It's a bit inconsistent, and I don't blame him for that. But he had a game against Robert Morris where he was zone busting from the middle. He just kind of had over space, so he hit these turnaround jumpers. You just catch it in space, hit a jumper, and it'd go in. And then everyone, all of a sudden, they started collapsing on him, and he was just dishing to the perimeter like whole game. It was really good. And then he had this nice spell against Colorado where you saw that the skill of a 6'9", 6'10" guy who can do everything. So like he defended a drive, brought the ball up, hit a 3-point shot, came back on defense, then got the ball back, hit a really great bounce pass down the lane, transition right into the pocket. But the idea of anyone kind of with size who can do multiple things, who can handle the ball a little bit. And I do, like I said, 54 percentile as a pick and roll ball handler isn't actually bad for a 6'9" guy. And I do like his ability to pass over the top and see the top, see the court with his size. So there's enough skill there to just to gamble on it. And in this draft, once you go out of the top 10, you're kind of getting a little bit dicey in terms of talent anyway. So I think someone will take the swing. You look at Josh Christopher. Josh Christopher had a pretty poor year in Arizona. I think once you get later into the draft, you might as well swing on someone who you just think was bad situation, who has the talent rather than just, high floor guy, if that makes sense.
PBJ is definitely going to be a guy to kind of, see as this continues and see if maybe he's able to better himself going into the draft before, or at least change the perception of him right before going in, and kind of maybe he can flip the script a little bit. But at this point, I mean, with a guy that's, with his size, do you view him as like a 3 at the next level or a 4? Because that's kind of my next question for just him and where he would fit kind of positionally, or is he kind of a tweener where you think he can do both? And I guess that's more from a defensive perspective than anything.
Defensively, I actually kind of like him as a help defender on the perimeter, because I think he's got a really obviously a long wingspan, so he's good at the nail in terms of just helping and in the passing lanes. But when he gets switched on to guarding in space, it can look really bad. He gets turned every way, and he's not a good defender. He's a bad defender. So you're probably going to want to hide him weak side. He's got the size maybe to be a weak side rotator one day under the rim. If someone team is drafting him, they're going to hope to have a really strong center at the rim and probably hide PBJ. So it kind of just depends on matchup. But him at the 3, if you didn't have a great switchable 4, would probably be exploited pretty easily, because I think he's at times a horrendous defender.
Speaking of a really strong defensive center, we're going to talk about Jalen Duren coming up next after a quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks. Are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to check out the award-winning app Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. So simple to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times back on any entry. And it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. You can use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our listeners. Listeners get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores just a single point. And all you have to do is use promo code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On listeners only. Sign up today and use promo code NBA for $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks scores a single point. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. And continue on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, thanks for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. For your next listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to Jalen Duren, who is apparently becoming a Locked On Rockets staple here on this show. He's a guy who I continue to be intrigued by, Nathan, because I get glimpses of a player who at the next level has a chance to be really dominant. But at the same time, again, I go back to my initial, point that I made very early on in the show, which is just that I don't know if right now he hasn't developed enough of, versatility elsewhere in his offensive game to think that he's going to be anything more than just a rim running big at the next level, who albeit is going to be a damn good rim running big and somebody who's going to wreak havoc on the boards offensively, defensively, can help anchor your team on that end of the floor. But, I haven't seen him develop enough offensively. And that's something that you and I brought up the very first time we talked about Jalen Duren was, is he going to be able to develop enough of an offensive game to where you think, okay, you can reasonably see him, adapting better at the NBA level?
Yeah. Yeah, so we talked about the outside shot, the passing, some very flashes of passing, not out of double teams, but most kind of like short roll or post up to cutters. And actually, he's kind of made a few mid-range games against SMU. He actually made a couple against Houston. He had a really nice game. But yeah, still very, very low usage. And I think, excuse me, I would be basically trying to draft him as a pick and roll center. And you called him, I think, a great, I mean, he's an elite play finisher right now in college. Like, he has a chance to be an absolutely dominant pick and roll big guy in the league. You know, we all want to have versatility, and we want these kind of like really fun, like Bam Adebayo big men who can do a bit of everything. And it's great to see someone who's 6'10", who can pass and handle. But the NBA is still a pick and roll league. And if you can set great screens, which Jalen Duren does, so if Houston has Jalen Duren, you can say goodbye to these weak screens that we see in Houston right now. You've got a really good screen. I mean, he likes to slip, and which doesn't make any sense in Memphis, because slipping is good when two guys go to the ball, because the ball handler is such a threat to pull up. So you slip and you kind of confuse them. No one's going to the ball in Memphis because like they just don't have the perimeter play. But in Houston, that could actually work. But he's such a great screen threat. And then he's shooting, he's in the 95th or 96th percentile in shots around the rim that aren't sort of post-ups. So he is an elite player. Finish any sort of lob. He's got good hands. I wouldn't say elite hands, but hands. And can just mop up anything. So if you've got good penetration, and Houston takes the most shots at the rim of any league, any team in the NBA, or at least they're very high up there. So if you imagine Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., maybe even Eric Gordon if he's still on the team, Dennis Schroeder if he's still on the team, maybe penetrating, and then you've got Jalen Duren just in the dunker spot. That's very tantalizing. I think he's going to be so good, and all the other stuff at the door for me. That's still an NBA center who's got a high upside in some sense. Maybe it's more scheme dependent, but that's something you can take to the bank.
I think the hardest part, though, is if you look at what the Rockets are sort of already trying, sort of building towards, is the fact that, Alperen Şengün is there, right? And yes, there's a lot of hype surrounding Alp and what he can or could ultimately grow into at the NBA level. I still think he's, got the makings of a starting caliber NBA center. I think there are some question marks about his defense, but, I think at that point, I don't necessarily envision a Jalen Duren and an Alperen Şengün coexisting on the floor together. And I know that when it comes to drafting, you should just take best player available. But I do think that when you are in this rebuilding kind of process that the Rockets find themselves in, I feel like at times you still lean BPA, best player available, but you do kind of have to shelve that in moments to think, okay, we can't just take the guy that we think is the best number one guy, because we have to kind of factor in who we currently have on the roster. And if the Rockets are looking with any, legitimacy at Jalen Duren, I think you have to wonder, okay, how does Jalen Duren fit alongside an Alperen Şengün? And I think at this point, maybe Alp develops an outside shot down the line. Maybe Jalen Duren develops an outside shot. But right now, that's two non-shooters, on the floor if the Rockets were to run those guys together. And they're both fives at this point. So I think that's kind of the big dilemma here, is you can't run those two guys in the front court at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen in the dunker spot with posting up and running the elbow sets and offs. And actually, the other way around, Jalen Duren's a great handoff player who can, set screen, pass, and then dive. But you want him to dive into space, and there's not going to be space if Alperen Şengün's on a block. So yeah, it's not ideal. I wouldn't stop me drafting Jalen if Rockets fall to like 8 and they don't like whoever's 9 and 10. But Alp is such a difficult one to answer, because he really can't play with many centers, and yet we're not
because he is a center. Unfortunately, that's what it is like he's a slightly undersized center at this point.
Yeah,
the limitations are placed on his game.
Yeah, and yet we need defense around him, and Jalen Duren is a fantastic defender. I mean, he can switch between any scheme and does so willingly. Switch everything on the perimeter to drop to playing up to the point of the screen in hedge, and he does it without making mistakes. He can do 3 or 4 coverages in one game, and I think he's just so good. And I think can at a high ceiling can have a Bam like level of play on defense, where he's just a defensive player of the year candidate in those conversations. Because where can you find a 6? I mean, he's listed at 6'11". This is my problem. I don't think he is 6'11". He kind of looks a little bit short out there. 25 a game. But finding a center who can switch everything and can be part of basically any defensive system that's where you can play in the corner or in drop and have Jalen guarding fours or gone, you can probably switch on ones and twos at some point, kind of like Clint Capella did. That's where it's really, where he becomes, in my mind, still a top 10 pick. I have him, I think, 6 probably on my board, because even if he never develops a passing game or the shooting game, executions and be an elite rim runner. I mean, you look at the draft where Clint Capella was drafted 25th, but if you look at the redraft, probably 8th, 9th, 10th, just off the top of my head, he's a top 10 player. Probably like 4th in his draft, but obviously he's way more skilled. So great big running bigs, great rim running bigs who can defend multiple positions are very, very, very valuable in the league. So I'm still very high on Jalen Duren. Yeah, sure.
And I think that's where some of my initial hype surrounding Jalen Duren kind of came from, is because I envisioned the idea of him being able to be played alongside Alperen Sengun to kind of anchor, the defense next to him. And that's where I've been kind of at an impasse of deciding, okay, what's the type of player that you want to put potentially next to Alp down the line? Can you conceivably run him at the 4 spot and put a defensive anchor of a 5 next to him, a la a Jalen Duren type? Or do you simply go with somebody, a switchy wing type, player 6'9", 6'10" next to him, who's going to be kind of the 4, and maybe run like a drop scheme where, guys are, 1 through 4 switching everything and kind of try to flatten out offenses that way to cater to Alperen Sengun and I don't want to say deficiencies defensively, but his limitations defensively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I probably thought about the best way is to have him in drop, and then so that's where you're hoping that you get Jabari Smith or AJ Griffin, maybe Paolo Banchero one day. But that might not happen. Houston might get the number 1 pick, and then they should pick Chet Holmgren, I think, and most people think. So what do you do then? That's a big question mark of wherever he can fit with Sengun. So it's just, yeah. This is why we all love Sengun, but this is why Sengun was, 16th in the draft. This is why he fell, because it's hard to build around him, even when he's playing so well. He's doing so well. Think about building around him. That's a good thing. But these questions were there pre-draft, and this is why he fell into Houston's lap. And it's not going to be easy. And I kind of just think just pick best player available, because who knows with these guys. So that's my take on the sort of philosophy for now, anyway.
And I always go back and forth between the BPA and like building for fit kind of thing. And I'll waver here and there. I don't waffle on it too much, but it's just one of those where it becomes almost too enticing, where you're like looking at a player and you're like, that player would be the perfect fit next to XYZ on the team currently, but you shouldn't go that route. I almost have to talk myself out of, going for fit and going for best player available. But we want to be able to talk about AJ Griffin here a little bit, who's a guy who I've spent a decent amount of time looking at. We know that Nathan spent the last 8 hours looking at AJ Griffin film. So we're going to talk about him coming up here in just one moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. Football might be over this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number 1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, where the game starts. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Make a little bit of money with Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, everybody is caught up on Paolo Banchero, but there's another guy playing for Duke who is a certified bucket, and that is AJ Griffin. The more that I watch this guy play, Nathan, the more that I come away thinking that he's going to be the guy that like sneaks into like the top 5 of this draft. Like, he is electric the way that he plays. The few games that I've been able to catch live of his have been impressive. And I don't think enough people are talking about him at this point, honestly. And maybe it's just because it's still kind of early in the draft process, and a lot of people are still really hung up on Paolo Banchero being one of the top prospects. But he deserves his flowers. He's going to be a really, really good talent at the next level.
Well, draft Twitter loves him. Draft Twitter's had him, anywhere second, third, fourth, fifth all year. So he's kind of the nerd, love of the year, I'd say. He's very exciting, as you say, to watch. 6'6", 220 pounds, 7-foot wingspan, multiple positions. That is the NBA prototype. You could build a player just off measurements and his athleticism, which is crazy high. And then when I tell you that, you're usually thinking, okay, so this is a guy who probably learned how to play basketball when he was 16, like a Keon Johnson, who has to find his skill. AJ Griffin's been like, a hooper, a that boy nice hooper for years. You listen to these podcasts and the scouting reports from the guys who are on the circuit in New York and have watched him play since he was 13, 14. He's been electric since then. He's from sort of a high pedigree of basketball sort of talent, and his family as well. I think his mom was a high level college player as well. So this isn't someone where it's just the athleticism; it's the talent as well. The top line numbers here. So the weird thing is, so he kind of had this injury preseason, and then he didn't really play much in the sort of first 9 or 10 games, which is why people weren't talking about him. But since he came back as a starter in the last 11 games, we're talking 12.6 points per game, 4.1 rebounds. But the shooting is where it's really at, which is 50% from the field and 52% from free. And if you just go on synergy, because every time he shoots, he scores, it's obviously synergy numbers are insane, like 95th percentile spot up, 99th percentile off screens, where he's scoring 1.8 points per possession, 96th percentile off cuts, 88th percentile on ISOs. That happens when you're shooting 50-odd%. So we need to kind of like temper that, because he's not that good of a three-point shooter. He apparently shot very well in high school, but he's not going to be a 50% shooter in the NBA, and it's he's got a nice handle, positive handle. He can drive. What's really impressive to me, he can drive with his left hand as well. He's a right-handed player, but he has this in and out dribble, which he can do with both hands, which gets him kind of off the bounce. He's got a great first step. The talent is just so intoxicating. It's so off the charts. And when you add it to the versatility, where he can defend multiple positions, and the scalable usage rate as well, where he's, this is an off-ball player where he might only take 3 shots a game, but he's kind of like Jae'Sean Tate, where he's going to have so much impact in all the other stuff.
Is it weird that I get like, you mentioned Jae'Sean Tate, but because of the shooting, and this isn't really like the proper comp because of it, but just like with his build and with the way that he kind of carries himself on the court, the ball handling, you mentioned the ability to kind of initiate contact a little bit, and then the defense that he's brings, I kind of get like some like Jimmy Butler with a shot vibes from him, sort of. Like Jimmy's obviously never been like a super consistent outside shooter. So, which at that point, like if you're talking about Jimmy Butler with a 3-ball, like that's really enticing as somebody that you might be able to pick up at the top of the draft, which is why I think that he could very easily sneak into that top 5, depending on where certain teams are kind of ranking, Jaden Ivey and some of the other top prospects at this point.
Yeah, I think I have him 5th. Yeah, and I think 5th. I mean, talking about top 4, and then potentially I don't know how Sheridan Sharp kind of comes into all this, and then a drop off, and then the rest of them. This is what we're doing in these few pods now. I think AJ Griffin is clearly, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinion, I would probably, if I had to bet on who goes 5th, I think it'd be AJ Griffin. For a comp, I was kind of half jokingly saying this to my head, but imagine if Daniel House was as good as all the things that everyone wanted him to be as good at. Like, those athletic articles that would come out every summer, whereas like he's working on his ISO game and his step backs and he can defend and he's a connector. If all that was true, that's kind of what AJ Griffin could be, where he's 6'6", athletic, can play above the rim. Imagine if he could finish at the rim as well.
Like, so AJ Griffin is if Daniel House realized his true potential as an NBA player.
Yeah, if he was as good as everyone thought he was after one good game, that's AJ Griffin, which is a really, really good player.
That's insane. I mean, I love that comparison. I think that's incredible. It is
like, thinking about doing a bit where I compare every prospect to Daniel House in some way, but I get old pretty quickly.
I mean, Jalen Duren is Daniel House if he was 4 inches taller and couldn't shoot from
outside,
but could finish inside. There you go.
Yeah, Chet Holmgren is Daniel if he was like on stilts and could shoot free, and if he was white.
I love that. That's going to become a new recurring bit here at Locked on Rockets is how can we compare this draft prospect to Daniel House Jr.? No, I know that we've talked about this draft and kind of the consensus right at this point is that it's kind of a top 4 draft, right? With the bigs at the top and then with Jaden Ivey in there as well. Do you think AJ Griffin is kind of like, he's like that consensus number 5th or number 5 at this point? Is, is there anybody else that you kind of pool into that next tier of player with AJ Griffin, or is he kind of like on an island there, in that second tier of player in this draft?
I think so. Yeah. I'm discounting Shaedon Sharpe for now, just because I haven't seen him. I think Johnny Davis for maybe 3 weeks was not probably actually the consensus Ivan was really. But I think I was always kind of lower on him, and I think people are kind of starting to question the shot creation, the athleticism of the first step to a point where in the NBA he's going to be kind of just another guard. He's definitely the more tantalizing, where someone's going to get him in. And I say this a lot, but the team's going to bring him for a workout, and he's going to look fucking incredible, and they're going to say we have to pick this guy. And they're probably going to talk themselves into saying we would have picked him number 2 or number 1 because he's probably going to look amazing. I think a lot of people
do you think AJ Griffin has a chance to jump the way Scotty Barnes did this last draft, where everybody had like the top 4 like pegged consensus, and then suddenly out of nowhere the Raptors go, nope, we're going Scotty Barnes over Jalen Suggs? Does AJ Griffin have that kind of potential? Because that's kind of what I'm seeing, or that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think in another draft he wouldn't be 5th because it's considered already weaker. That's kind of already really quite high when you think about it. But I think up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have said, even though I had Ivy, I think a lot of people were obviously lower on him. So I would have said that actually there's a pretty good chance he jumps over Ivy. But Ivy's been so good recently that I think if he carries on like this, he's going to cement his top 4, maybe even top 3, top 2 pick. Jabari Smith is falling a little bit, I think. The shot's kind of fallen off, and people are starting to question, okay, I mean, I think no one doubts he's going to be a great shooter, an elite shooter, but people are starting to maybe think, okay, if he's not 45% from free, offense everywhere else in the court in terms of getting to his shot, getting to the line, getting to the rim. So I would, if I had to guess who would, it would be Smith. But that's because I'm seeing an upward trajectory with Ivy right now, so I'm kind of predicting the future a little bit. I think 5 is probably as high as he would go. Especially because a lot of teams will still be trying to bet on superstar upside, and some people see that with Griffin, with like you said, Jimmy Butler or Jaylen Brown, and Butler took 3 or 4 years to get to that level in the NBA. So if you just start off as a very athletic 2-way wing who can scale your usage, then you're on a sort of you're on that rung of a ladder, and when you have the talent he has and the skill package he has, it's a chance it's there, but it's a very, very high ceiling. I see him more as just this great role player who can fit in on any team. I mean, his hustle is, I would love him on the Rockets just because, he would help with the transition stuff immediately. He flies around. I think, sometimes he doesn't rotate to the right guy, but he rotates to every guy. He will just keep going. Like if you imagine just the hustle and brings on every position is unlike any player in the draft, I would say, who's got the high potential. That's immediately giving you sort of really great role player vibes, and then when you add in the ability for him to take the pull-up mid-range shot, which isn't a lot, but the ability for him to drive with both hands, the 3-point shot, which has obviously been amazing so far. That's someone's going to bet on that for sure. Someone's going to take a swing on that, and I'm not even sure it is a bet or a gamble. I think it's a pretty locked-on thing.
Oh, is it locked on? Is it a locked on thing? Great pun, Nathan. No, you talk about scalability a lot, and I think that's kind of one of the it's not necessarily a concern of mine, but is he a guy that you conceivably could give the ball to, kind of scale up the usage on him, and basically expect him to potentially be a number 1 option down the line at the NBA level? Or is he somebody, as you alluded to, maybe just like that uber amazing role player who doesn't need to have the ball to be effective, but can be somebody who can step up on a given night kind of thing?
Well, I think with Griffin, you're betting on improvements because he apparently hasn't played much basketball in a couple of years because of COVID and some injuries. So he's kind of starting almost from a lower, even compared to everyone's kind of missed games with COVID, but apparently he's missed it even more. So you're betting on not just what you're seeing. I mean, he's also one of the youngest players in the draft. He'll be 18 on draft night, and he won't tell 19 till August. So if you compare him to, I think Paolo Banchero is going to be late 19 by draft night. He could go back to college. He won't, obviously, because he's going to be top 5 pick, but he could go back to college next year and improve. So I think if you get him in a good developmental system, and obviously I don't want to get in on the Houston Twitter war over the last few days about whether we are a good developmental system, but let's hope we are. And you could really work on it's like an baseball 5 tools guy. I don't watch baseball much of it when I was in the playoffs, but I think that's a good analogy where you've got so much to work with that you'd be like a coach should be can't wait to get the hands on him because he's just going to be electric, and you're just thinking, oh, there's so much talent here. Yeah, I think he can be. He's shown some good passing out of pick and rolls, and like I said, I think he's got an advanced handle. I think he's got a better handle than a lot of guards actually in terms of his protection and a quick first step. And he draws defenders in. He's so big and powerful that when he drives, you can't help but help on him, and he's immediately quick boom pass to the first guy. So I think the game is simple for him in some ways. Whether he can get to, a 20-point per game scorer in the NBA, I think you look at the 3-point shots he makes, it's like step back, side steps. He had one where it's kind of like he throws up a fake, guy jumps over and shows the ball to the left side and then goes back up again. It's kind of like, where did this come from? Because I'd never heard of him in high school. I don't follow high school. So the first few games, you're watching these spot up threes where he's just hitting corner threes. But then you start to see these self-created shots, and that's when you start to think, wow, this guy has a lot of talent for sure.
It's always those self-created shots, the ones where you're generating your own offense that kind of become eye-opening at the collegiate level, where you're like, oh, okay, like this guy, if he can do this now, like that's something that you kind of bank on potentially being able to translate moving forward in their career, rather than them being a player that is reliant on somebody else to generate their offense. They're generating their own offense, which inherently, especially moving forward at the NBA level, means you're conceivably supposed to be able to generate offense for everybody else on the team as well, because if you're creating your own offense, you're pulling in the defense to you, creating double teams, all of that, creating advantageous opportunities for your team and kicking it to your teammates for easy opportunities for them, hopefully, right? So AJ Griffin is he's the guy I'm keeping an eye on. He's like my sleeper pick, where obviously like I still want the Rockets to come away with like a top pick and come away with the debate, like if they land at number 2 again and we're going back and forth on Chet Holmgren and Paolo Banchero or Jabari Smith or whoever at the top of the draft. I'd love to be in that position again. But if the Rockets do find themselves falling and they're somewhere around that 4, 5, 6 range, I would love to see AJ Griffin on the board right now for them.
Yeah, I mean, he would fit great with it. You think of him and Jalen in transition. You think of him cutting off. I mean, a great cutter. So you think of him with Şengün roving around, these weak side screens that we set where it's a double screen stagger where he can set the screen and then flare off to the perimeter or sort of curl around, screen with screen interaction and go to the rim. The one thing I would say is that I don't know if I do not think he's a movement shooter in terms of kind of curling around off screens and running floppy sets. He's someone who sets screen flare out or spot up or, that type of thing, which is fine. But I was thinking that Portland, I think, currently have the 8th and 9th pick or the 7th and 8th pick because of the New Orleans trade. So I was thinking, imagine a world where they get like AJ Griffin and Benedict Mathurin back to back, and that's their wing rotation set for the next, the next decade. That would be cool. Anyway, we're not a Portland podcast, but that'd be pretty cool for them. So yeah, a good consolation prize, I would say, and probably the best consolation prize in terms of high floor, high ceiling if we fall out the top 4.
Whoa! Also, I've been told that Portland is retooling, not rebuilding. So I'm.
Well, they could trade them to us for Christian Wood and Eric Gordon.
There we go. Yeah, Christian Wood and Eric Gordon. Those are some win now pieces for the Portland Trailblazers who are trying to retool around Damian Lillard, who will surely take them to the promised land one day.
I think we will talk about this in the summer, I'm sure, and this is a conversation for once we knock on wood get that top 4 pick, but. There's some kind of interesting draft down possibilities if you could get Griffin and, Mathurin or Griffin and Duren or something. I think because then you get the superstar potential with AJ Griffin and you get kind of just really good player with Ben and Mathurin. That's a conversation for another day, but all sorts of possibilities in the top 10 for sure.
It is a conversation for another day, one that we will surely have as we get closer to this year's NBA draft. But Nathan, always a pleasure to have you on to talk about Rockets basketball and by extension, the prospective players in this year's NBA draft. You know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down
at Nathan Fogg 1 on Twitter. My website is TN Rockets. We're going to be talking G League Ignite, the threesome from G League Ignite next week or week after. So keep an eye out for Locked On Rockets too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nathan. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, man. Speak soon.
That's going to do it for today's episode. Which prospect are you most intrigued by from today's episode? Is it Patrick Baldwin Jr.? Is it Jalen Duren? Or is it AJ Griffin? Let us know in the YouTube comments. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your shows. Apple, Spotify, Google, brand new Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. Just mentioned YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.